欢迎大家来参加今天的开会。我是罗立明，真多谢台湾政府给我这个机会来参加今天的活动，来帮助原住民。多谢。Welcome to another edition of this seminar. My name is Edward Lowe, and I thank Taiwan for the opportunity to organize this panel again in solidarity with our indigenous neighbors. Thank you. As we begin, I'd like to yield the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Tom Lee for introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Lowe. I don't know you can speak Taiwanese. What he just said is Taiwanese, is not Mandarin. Members of diplomatic corps and delegations from Paraguay, Taiwan, Philippines, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Tom Chih-chiang Lee. I'm the Director General of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in New York. And on behalf of TECONY New York, I want to welcome you to this meaningful seminar. And this seminar actually aligns with the theme of UN Forum on Indigenous issues. And today we are also very honored to have speakers and also panelists from different backgrounds. And I think their insights on indigenous issues will be very helpful to us. And I don't know how many of you are aware, in Taiwan we also have indigenous peoples. In total we have 16 different tribes. They have their languages, they have their culture, and some can be linked to Austronesian peoples. And some people in Taiwan even say that actually Austronesian peoples originate from Taiwan. Let me share with you a short story. Before coming to New York, I was our chief of protocol. You know, chief of protocol is in charge of eating, drinking, and having fun. Some people say, but actually it's not an easy job. And I remember about 3 years ago, I had the honor to accompany one foreign minister from our Pacific ally to visit one indigenous village in Taitung. And we attended the apprenticeship ceremony. And the foreign minister's sister will be recruited as a trainee to learn tattooing. And you may be curious, how come she wanted to come all the way from Pacific to Taiwan to learn tattooing? The answer actually is very simple, because there's one very famous tattoo master who specializes in hand tapping tattooing. I see a lot of people are nodding your head, so you understand what's hand tapping. Simply speaking, it's like you don't use a modern tool to do tattooing. You use a traditional way. And in that country, actually they lost the skill long time ago. That's why she wanted to come to Taiwan to learn. And she hoped in the future she can pass down the skill back to the country. And on that trip, I also learned tattooing actually is very important in Pacific, because in the old days there's no passport. So when you travel from island to another, as long as they see your tattoo, they can know which island you come from. So it's like the passports in the old days. And some of their words, like ice, are pronounced exactly like our indigenous peoples. So I think we are connected to each other. So I promise you I'm not going to deliver a long speech. So in concluding my remarks, I only want to add indigenous culture is a precious asset for the entire world. As we exchange ideas, we can always learn from each other and move forward together to address shared challenges and promote the rights of indigenous peoples. So I look forward to the fruitful discussion. Thank you.
We'll now have an institutional video from the National Human Rights Commission of the Republic of China, Taiwan, followed by remarks from the Honorable Calivat Gadu, Deputy Minister of the Council of Indigenous Peoples.
国家人权委员会就要正式的运作，这是我国人权保障的里程碑。我要谢谢监察院的邀请，让我能够来见证历史性的一刻。
国家迈向民主、自由、人权的重要，正义凛然。
人权会从2020年成立国家人权会以来，我们始终在关注着原住民族。
I am Ubay Sao, Commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission, and I am indigenous Amish people. Taiwan is a multicultural nation with 5 main ethnic groups: indigenous peoples, Minnan Hakka, mainlanders after World War II, and the new immigrants. We urge the government to promote ethnic mainstreaming so that every group could be equally valued as a part of our society. There has been great progress in indigenous rights, especially in languages, health, and land. The Indigenous Language Development Act and Indigenous Peoples Health Act have been passed. However, the rights are still a major issue, like the Indigenous Land and Marine Areas Act, Land and Survey Committee, and Reserve Land Rights Review Committee. The National Human Rights Commission will still continue to monitor government acts to meet international human rights standards. Thank you. Arai.
I am Basuya Boyzonen, a commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission and a member of the Zhou People's Indigenous People in Taiwan. I am deeply committed to advocating for indigenous land rights, educational and cultural rights, and have previously conducted investigation into cases of encroachment upon traditional territories. I am pleased that the National Human Rights Commission has incorporated ethnic mainstreaming and monitoring indigenous rights into its medium-term strategy plan. Through implementing this plan, we oversee government actions and work together to ensure the realization of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples.
Hello everyone, I'm Wen Chenin, a commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission, committed to advocating for indigenous human rights in Taiwan. Through investigative efforts, I have promoted government actions that increase the proportions of indigenous military generals from 2022 to 2023. Additionally, I work on improving access to free public wireless internet in indigenous communities, ensuring that access points were placed in more practical locations based on actual usage patterns. In May 2024, I attended the International Ombudsman Institute World Conference, where I delivered a presentation on the role and functions of the ombudsman in advancing the protections of the rights of indigenous peoples at the Paris Forum. I firmly believe that international exchanges allow other countries to understand Taiwan's indigenous culture better and provide an opportunity to explore the global challenges and solutions in advancing indigenous rights. Looking ahead, the NHRC in Taiwan will continue collaborating with domestic agents, civil society groups, international institutions, and national human rights institutions worldwide. Through this partnership, we strive to enhance indigenous rights protections, implement the International Human Rights Convention, and uphold the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Calivat Gadu, Deputy Minister of the Council of Indigenous Peoples in Taiwan, and I am a member of the Taiwan people. On behalf of the CIP, I want to thank His Excellency Ambassador Tom Lee and the TECONY New York for hosting this wonderful seminar. Also, thank you to all the friends, families, brothers, and sisters for joining us today. It is an honor to be a part of this event. I truly wish I could be there in person to share and exchange ideas with you face to face. But right now, we are in the middle of the parliamentary session in Taiwan. I thought it would be a great idea to show up through this video and share with you our journey in Taiwan, what we have done, what we have learned, and the road ahead when it comes to indigenous land and resource rights. So let's go started. In Taiwan, indigenous rights were officially recognized in 2005 through our Indigenous Peoples Basic Act, which was a huge milestone. It guarantees our rights to land and the natural resource, and it requires the government to consult with indigenous peoples and the communities before any development, conservation, or research in our territories. It also guarantees that indigenous peoples can share in the benefits. But as many of you know, recognition is just the beginning. What really matters is how those rights are respected in practice. That's where the CIP comes in. Our role is to push forward policies that protected these rights, and we are doing this through three major efforts. 1. Protect the basic rights of indigenous peoples. 2. Promote indigenous livelihood and development. And 3. Establish relations of coexistence and prosperity. Of course, we are not alone here. Land, water, forestry, mining, these are all managed by different government agencies. So one of our biggest tasks is making sure everyone's on the same page and sees things through an indigenous lens. Because indigenous peoples have been caring for this land for generations. Our knowledge, our customs, and our relationship with nature are key to making sustainable policies work. As the central government agency in charge of indigenous affairs, CIP has been doing everything we can to promote policies on indigenous lands and the natural resources. Our work focuses on 4 key areas: biodiversity, conservation policies, mountain and forest guardianship, co-management mechanisms, and the traditional and the customary use of natural resources. The Indigenous Peoples Basic Act lays the foundation for indigenous land rights. To achieve harmony in policy and ethnic development, the government respects the decision made by indigenous communities. The policies on natural resources involve multiple agencies, such as those managing soil, water, forests, and minerals, all of which impact indigenous interests. The Council of Indigenous Peoples, as the central authority, must coordinate these policies from the indigenous perspective, promoting sustainability and coexistence. All agencies should recognize indigenous peoples as the original caretakers of the land. Their time-honored wisdom and traditional knowledge are keys for developing sustainable resource policies. To implement the 2005 Indigenous Peoples Basic Act, Taiwan passed the Logging Ban Compensation Act for lands reserved for indigenous people on December 18, 2016. It provides legal compensation for restricted land use. This is in line with Taiwan's national goals of land conservation, environmental protection, and climate change mitigation. An amendment of December 31st, 2019 expanded the scope of the logging ban and increased the compensation to 60,000 NT dollars per hectare. Starting in 2025, as of last year, 51,000 indigenous peoples received compensation for 78,000 hectares of land. This policy promotes fair compensation and benefits Taiwan through water conservation, carbon sequestration, and soil erosion prevention. On January 10, 2023, Taiwan passed the Climate Change Response Act, which makes it very clear in Article 3 that just transition is our national priority. Article 5 highlights the importance of indigenous participation of natural carbon sinks in indigenous territories. To ensure a just transition, the Council of Indigenous Peoples engages in dialogue with other agencies and provides resources for fair benefit sharing mechanism. Given that climate change poses serious threats to indigenous territories and livelihoods, indigenous peoples are prioritized in climate policy. Their traditional knowledge, rooted in a deep understanding of the land, supports sustainable resource management. Moving forward, indigenous voices must be heard. Their rights must be respected, and they deserve a seat at the table. If energy transition projects are carried out on indigenous lands, the government must consult with and obtain consent from indigenous communities, in line with Article 21 of the Indigenous Peoples Basic Act. Taiwan's indigenous traditional knowledge is deeply rooted in the land and closely connected to climate. Logging ban compensation reflects transformative justice and aligns with indigenous efforts to protect the forests. This policy helps with climate adaptation. It is also essential to support community-based solutions and recognize the value of indigenous knowledge. CIP is committed to upholding the principle of leaving no one behind by engaging with indigenous peoples in energy transition and conservation. Through open dialogue and inclusive policy making, our goal is to create a future where sustainable development truly works for everyone. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Mali Mali Masaru.
I'd like to now welcome to the floor Sean Duncan, who is a Cherokee instructor, writer and advocate, and co-director of Dadiwanisi, or We Will Speak. He has taken this feature-length film all across the United States. Please give him a warm
CEO Nagadawu, Ulogil Dawaton, Oklahoma Chinela, still Oklahoma Waters, John no Geo Jaslanetla, Anigatuwa Gela, Jigatuwag, Chih-chiang. If somebody had told me that I was going to be speaking my indigenous language at all 10 years ago, I probably would have laughed in their face. But to be able to speak my language in one of the greatest cities in the world, New York City, with so many esteemed guests and so many great people, I would have just been blown away at that idea. I didn't grow up fluent, but I specifically work in the revitalization of the Cherokee language and how that relates to our indigenous rights as people, as Cherokee people, as Ketua people. My journey to this work has been very tumultuous. I got to spend 40 hours a week with some really great people, but I realized that this was my personal journey. And long before even I existed, there was a political journey to make sure that I did not have my language. So the work that we do as Indigenous activists works towards correcting that wrong of taking our Indigenous languages away from our Indigenous people. And so, am I too close? Sorry. In 1819, the federal boarding school system started working in the United States government to make sure that Indigenous children were taken from their families and making sure that they would learn only English and forget that their own traditional ways. The U.S. Commission of Indian Affairs, only by complete isolation of the Indian child from his savage antecedents can be satisfactorily educated, meaning only speaking English. And we've all heard the famous quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man." So these things that we do now as people, as Indigenous people, to make sure that our rights are respected and that our languages and our cultures stay alive, are undoing a lot of trauma and healing that we have to do in our lives. So as we got a really great presentation about what Taiwan is doing for its indigenous people, the US and the UN are also moving towards making sure that we keep our languages with beautiful policy. And it's still a fight, obviously, but the UN has begged for us to respect indigenous peoples, have the right to revitalize and use and develop their languages and develop their children in the education in their own language. And so what we hope to do as language workers is to make sure that we empower people to continue to do that work and continue to do it in their own way. So yeah, I would totally be remiss if I was in New York City and I didn't say that I'm only here by the work of the ancestors who came before me and my teachers who gave me my language, because they didn't only give me the words that they knew, they gave me parts of themselves. So yeah, I talked a little bit about the past, but I think we're also going to show a short clip of my film. And so if you guys are interested in the language work that people are doing, specifically in the Cherokee community, to make sure that our rights are recognized and our language continues on, you can watch this on Canopy. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it is available on Canopy. Here's just a clip of this. Wado.
I always used to argue that you can have the culture without the language, because I was looking at the surface. And you can pass on the culture, but it's just an echo without the language, because the language produces the culture.
Ja, dwi'n kilo G-stelti. Sgynna G-steli sgygolhws gywdell gwastig. A del gwasg. Kilo nŵdel y gywe hiogig. Sgwyawd dwi'n.
There's just different kids that I think are going to be future leaders, you know, and help take our language into the next generation. If our ancestors hadn't have been forced to relocate to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, then we would have grew up here.
You cannot talk about the potential of a language going extinct for Cherokee people without talking about boarding schools. Indian education, as far as the United States is concerned, really is a war tactic.
It's something that I would not put my kids through, but my parents had no choice.
We've been here since the last ice age. Our grandparents are buried here, which means the ground literally has our DNA. We must try to do everything that we can to hold on to these things, to the language. It's not just a way of speaking, it's a way of seeing the world.
Our ancestral knowledge is kept in the language that our ancestors spoke. And so if we lose our language, we're losing that whole library of knowledge. And so we have to learn that language to keep that, our way of being alive.
For too long, it's been neglected, I think. And I think we just need more media and we need more things in the language. And then that's going to really help people learn. There are so many people just like making native culture, like they're pushing it out there.
We're always reminded of their urgency. It's like trying to pick up a handful of water. I can't do it all by myself. You are, everybody. And it's only going to be when there's an absence that they finally see that if you don't, it's gone. And we can only hope that they don't.
So my name is Edward Lowe. I'm currently working as Assistant Professor of Geology at Georgia Southern University. I'm trained as a sedimentary geologist, piecing together environmental change, paleo-environmental change through records of lake sediments, river sediments. So you might be wondering why I'm here organizing this panel. Well, it's very important that as geoscientists we acknowledge and also go beyond acknowledging the importance of traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous traditional knowledge that Deputy Minister Calivat Gadu has mentioned in his video. And so this is part of that work, so that as geoscientists and as indigenous peoples we can work together towards a stronger future. I'd like to give an opportunity for each of our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm back. You just saw my face. I just did my introduction in Cherokee, but I would maybe translate it for you. My name's Sean. I am a Cherokee instructor, filmmaker, artist. I kind of do a little bit of everything, but I work at the University of Oklahoma, and I'm a member of the United Band of Cherokee Indians outside of Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Poso. Sagoli, Sutton King, Naktau, Pinuki, Nukyat, Ungwa Hawaii, Ni'i, Wagnata, Nawagi Talota, Onuyota Aga Ni'i. Hello, relatives. My English name is Sutton King. My Menominee name is Naktau Pinuki, which means comes first woman. I shared in the Oneida language that I am Turtle Clan and I'm people of the Standing Stone. A little bit about myself. I'm an Indigenous rights activist first and foremost. I'm a community member, I'm a sister, I'm a cousin, I'm a friend. But my heart really is focusing on decolonizing public health. So I'm the co-founder and president and executive director of the Urban Indigenous Collective. We are a grassroots Indigenous-led public health NGO based here in Midtown Manhattan, so-called what we call Lenape Hoking, really making sure that the over 180,000 urban natives that call this place home have access to the culturally tailored health and wellness services that we absolutely deserve, right? And so it's been a great honor to steward this organization over the last 5 years, and we look forward to continuing to strengthening our kinship bonds and partnerships both here and globally.
Hi everyone, Chokma, Sahochifo Delaney, Chickasaw, Chakasha, Choctaw, Sac and Fox, Saya. Hi everyone, my name is Delaney Seals. I am from Ada, Oklahoma. I recently graduated from East Central University with my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. So currently I am an adjunct professor teaching U.S. government and working on research with an organization called Honor the Earth to evaluate the way tribes in Oklahoma have impacted our environment through water conservation, protection of resources, stopping pollution, and promoting kind of the work that's been going on that not a lot of people know about. They just kind of see what the federal government's doing or the state government's doing and kind of don't really think about the work that tribes have put in to protect our natural resources, not just because of economics and trying to build a casino, as some people would say, but also because this is our homeland, this is where we reside, and it's important that we protect where we're from, because we have really nowhere else to go for a lot of tribes who have federally recognized reservations. So that's a little bit of the work that I do. I'm super excited to be on this panel. Thank you so much.
Hische, Stunko. My name is Leanna Shui. I am a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Oklahoma, but I'm based out of New York City since 2018. I am an educator for my day job. I work at the New York Historical, just across the way on the Upper West Side. And I also am the co-founder of Relative Arts New York City, a peer-run community space and shop in the East Village, where we have more than 50 contemporary Indigenous artists represented from across North Central and South America. I'm also a cultural worker, advocate, and community organizer and community member, most importantly. Really excited to be a part of this conversation today. Thank you so much, Edward, for organizing this. And I'm really grateful to get to be on this panel with some other Oklahoma natives and my sister Sutton, who I've done a lot of work with here in Lenapehoking over the last several years. So grateful to be here.
I'm so grateful this year for this opportunity again and to see old friends, meet new people this year. It's no coincidence also that it's Earth Day today, and with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations displayed prominently behind me, I want to emphasize that some of the primary goals that I work towards are sustainable communities, Goal 11, and life below water, Goal 15. So the theme of our conversation today with all of our panelists is to discuss challenges and best practices in implementing Indigenous rights, right? Moving forward together with everybody, regardless of the level of recognition. So my first question to the panel is, what do Indigenous rights mean to you in the everyday work that you do? And that's also through the context of the terms environmental justice and traditional ecological knowledge that we've heard a couple of times already today.
I'm happy to jump in. Well, I'm glad you said in our everyday lives, right? Because I think upholding Indigenous rights and sovereignty isn't abstract. It's something we embody, right? We embody it in the way that we are, in community, in kinship, right? The way that we are showing up in the ways that we are co-creating safe spaces, right? And I think for the Urban Indigenous Collective, for us, it's ensuring that not only do our community members have access to the health and wellness services that they need, but it's also ensuring that we have autonomy over our bodies. It's ensuring that we have autonomy over land, right? All of these are interrelated. It's making sure we have access to language. When we think about public health, right? We're thinking about the social determinants of health, right? And the many intersectionalities that support our well-being. And I think for us as urban natives, many of us living here, one of the first things a lot of us ask when we come here is, where is Indian Health Service? And so if you're not familiar with Indian Health Service, it is a federal agency tasked with providing healthcare to natives, right? And that's for those who are federally recognized or state recognized. But what about the unrecognized, right? And for me, as someone who was formerly the director of a federal urban Indian health program here in New York City, it was so difficult for me really coming from this decolonized public health lens, having got a master's at NYU, one of the best public health programs, and seeing how many barriers exist when you are only accepting money from federal institutions, right? And so how do we take back our autonomy? And so for me, that was really ensuring that, hey, you know what? There are gaps here that exist in this community, and the best people to create the solutions are the community, right? And I say my co-founder, Dr. Ariel Richard now, she'll say, we're always fixing problems that we didn't create. But we are the subject matter experts, and so who best to create them?
I'll go. Okay. No, I just appreciate the words that you brought up, Sutton, thinking about autonomy, sovereignty, self-determination. For myself and my co-founder in the audience, Karina Emmerich, hey, what's up? For Relative Arts and I think that between Relative Arts and the Urban Indigenous Collective, we're kind of coming at two different angles to solve what is a holistic gap in care for our Indigenous people, especially in urban spaces. And being able to have the sovereignty and the self-determination to be able to create those spaces and to create spaces where we don't have to code switch, where we can come in and meet each other exactly where we're at without having to lay the groundwork before we get into these revolutionary conversations and discussions, and being able to craft our futurisms is kind of the whole point of the work, right? It's what was taken from us and taken from our ancestors that in our path towards kind of removing having to lay that groundwork and have that beginning conversation. Delaney and I were just kind of talking about this, getting to a point where we are readily recognized without having to spend all of our breath screaming that we still exist, and instead being able to actually get into the conversations about how we establish our own self-determination and what that actually looks like and how we manifest that instead of just having to spend all of our time saying we are here, right?
I'd love to just jump in real quick and say, one way that we're really combating that is through community-based participatory research, right? And looking at the lack of data desegregation that does exist, right? There's no reason that in 2020, at the prime of this pandemic, I was having to yell outside of the mayor's office that our data is not desegregated as Indigenous peoples here. We are quite literally lumped into other, and so what we're seeing is a paper genocide, right? Eliminating the responsibility of the fiduciary, of the government to Native people, whether on reservations or off reservations. And as you said, these spaces that we're creating is we have to create these because, again, who else is doing it?
If I want to add on to that, I completely agree, and I think the sentiments from both of you is just that, wanting to get into activism, wanting to advocate for Native people, it's something kind of you're forced into for most Indigenous people. Seems like we're always at odds with a dominant power. So I think when I think about what Indigenous people's rights mean to me, at the basic level, it's just getting involved in my tribe, learning about my heritage. I grew up, I'm from Oklahoma. I grew up up on my reservation, recently upheld by McGirt, a Supreme Court case. But we've always known it's our land, so we don't need the Supreme Court to tell us. Being surrounded by my tribe, having opportunities to learn my language at our language department, work for my tribe, literally being able to get paid to learn my language, and then also just learning about my culture, about my traditions. That's like kind of the basic thing for me when I think about like Indigenous people, Indigenous rights, how people can get involved. But like in the more complicated sense, so I studied legal studies during my undergraduate degree. And what I largely studied was kind of like the relationship of the federal government with, tribal nations and federal Indian policy and how we are structured now, and how we are continuously trying to fight for our rights to our, land, to our natural resource, to our language, cultural revitalization, just our existence. And how this is developed through, different political systems, statewide, federally. It's a bit complicated, and it's nice to see, annual meetings or conventions where Indigenous people from all over the world are able to meet together, because even though we are not a monolith, we don't all have the same, problems, the same needs. It's important that we still are able to kind of get together and express like these situations and the issues that we struggle with, and not just talk about it, but like do something about it. So going back to the thing about legal studies and political science and kind of my background in that area, largely what I studied was how Native people, through federal Indian policy, through the Supreme Court, through being running for Congress, working with the federal government, how we have established our rights through Supreme Court cases, through legislation. Again, we don't need, the United States or other, countries to tell us, if we are an actual tribe, if we're indigenous. But obviously, that's how we operate in the system. So I'm really inspired by Native activists, specifically in the legal field, who are advocating Native attorneys. We need more Native attorneys fighting for our rights at all levels of the government. And I hope to be able to be a part of that one day. And also people doing grassroots movements, organization to advocate for our community, building safe spaces, community hubs for everybody to kind of congregate in one place, or just educating people about kind of what Indigenous people go through, our history, and how we can better our situation. Yeah.
I think you guys said it all. No, yeah, I think you guys bring up really good points about what is Indigenous rights and what does that mean to me? Because I think a lot of times, and you guys have already said it, is that we do feel like Indigenous rights is just trying to exert our existence, like just making sure that we say we are here. But really the true Indigenous rights and the true ability to think as an Indigenous person and be an Indigenous person and what those rights look like is like, what does our futures look like, right? And so the right to have a future, for me, it would be a really good way to put it. So I said earlier, I didn't think I would be able to speak my language in New York City, but now if somebody said, somebody next year is going to be speaking Cherokee in New York City, I have a right and a future to see that that's possible now. And when I was younger, that was not a possibility. And so for me, Indigenous rights is, it should just be easy. Like, we exist, we should be respected and valued as humans in the world and the way we see it. But it is also just giving people the idea of a future that they can see for themselves and their culture.
I'm so proud that each of you are living this to its fullest and enacting these values in your everyday lives. My next question is, what do you consider to be your community in your work, whether that's language preservation or public health, environmental law, or grassroots organizing?
I'll go again. For me, my community is, I mean, obviously, largely it's the Cherokee community. But if I'm thinking more specific, I'm thinking about my family, the community I come from. But in my work, it is a multi-generational thing. And so community is kind of an all-encompassing word for me, where I get to talk about my teachers like Doris Schell, Gary Van, Christine Armour, Cora Flew. These are all first language fluent speakers who have put work into me. And so for me, community as a language worker is almost like a bridge. And so a bridge from the generations that come before me, but also to be that bridge for the generation that comes behind me. And so I always want to, when I think of community, that's what I think of, is like, where's my space in the middle of all that? And who am I helping while I'm in community with these people?
As you're speaking, I can see like a diagram being formed of all the different communities and the intersection of you. But yeah, that's so beautiful. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, yeah, who are all my communities? I think, you know, beginning with my, you know, inception into this world, my communities, my family, which are Menominee people, Oneida people, those are the cosmologies in which I see the world through, right? My grandmother is an enrolled member of the United Nations of Wisconsin. It was my mom and my grandma who largely raised me, but I'm also African American, I'm also Black, right? So I'm part of the Black community. I'm also queer, I'm part of the queer community. I also live in Lenape-Hoking, I also live in the Bronx, so, you know, the Bronx is my community, you know? But the urban Native diaspora is largely my community, right? And we are an intertribal community, we are a large community, and it is rich, right? And so for the Urban Indigenous Collective, for us, it's really being able to unite all Indigenous peoples of the Americas, of the Caribbean, and be in allyship with Indigenous peoples globally, because let's be clear, right? Colonization, it was a global project, right? The ship stopped many places, right? And so healing is going to have to be a global project, right? We have to heal together, right? And I'll never forget, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was a part of the Global Youth Caucus for the United Nations, and I had the privilege of sitting in a talking circle with youth from all around the world, right? And as we spoke, we shared our hopes and our aspirations and the work that we're holding, and there is so much that makes us similar, right, in terms of the erasure we have experienced, the displacement, right, the grasp to our you know, our culture and our language, but that resilience also flows within us, right, and that ability to heal and forgive and be able to focus on the future 7 generations, right? As a Haudenosaunee woman, that is the way in which we look at healing. Healing isn't linear, right? I don't heal for myself. That's an individualistic Western way, right? I heal for my ancestors before me, and I heal for the future generations, right? And so those are the communities that I heal for.
Yeah, so, you know, like I mentioned, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm Chickasaw, enrolled in the Chickasaw Nation, but I'm also Choctaw, Sac and Fox. I'm also Irish, Scottish, you know, African American. So I have a lot of different identities that kind of like coincide in me, and you know, a lot of different people that I interact with. So I didn't, you know, always have the experience of being surrounded by Native community or being involved in Native communities. They were obviously always there. I lived on my reservation. There was a lot of, you know, offices and resources for my people and for other people, but I didn't, you know, like have an auntie to like teach me how to learn how to bead, or like I didn't, you know, have somebody to teach me my language, or I think I got my first ribbon skirt 2 years ago, so I just didn't really have a lot of access to the resources or cultural opportunities that other people had, so I took it upon myself to you know, get involved in my tribe. And when I think about community, I think about, you were talking about, Sean, like uplifting others, and I feel like that's largely what my, you know, my tribe, other tribes in Oklahoma, tribes all across the United States are doing, Indigenous people are doing, are trying to uplift other people, our cultures, bring our cultures back, bring our language back. So I had you know, plenty of opportunities to be able to get involved with my tribe. I literally joined this program called Togethe, where we were able to work youth were able to work, and I was able to work at my language department where I made kids books in Chickasaw and taught other people Chickasaw. So it was, opportunities like that, or there was this program called Chikasha Palik Chi-ikpi, creating Chickasaw leaders. We were able to, being in that program, it was my first time being able to travel to DC and interact with politicians, NCAI, big groups, NARF, groups or people that are, organizations that are already out here advocating for Indigenous people's rights, specifically in the United States. But that was kind of like my first experience, first time learning about, the issues that my tribe faces, the issues that Indigenous people face, whether it be, access to healthcare and being able to, have access to IHS programs. So my community has always, even though I wasn't super deeply involved in my culture growing up, I had many opportunities to be able to kind of get involved, learn about my heritage, and I really am thankful for my tribe and for my people, and for all the Indigenous groups, tribes in Oklahoma that are working on building up these programs for people to get involved. Not only just, being able to kind of have resources like clothing grants or getting, tuition waivers or things like that, but also, being involved in cultural programs to learn about our origin stories, traditional stories, interact with elders, and get to know other Native people. So I've always been surrounded by my community, and I'm really thankful for all the opportunities that my tribe has given me. Yeah.
So beautiful to hear from everybody. You all are my community, right? So yeah, it's like a really beautiful thing, I think, to be Indigenous and, to have the inherited blood memory and trauma and resilience and everything that comes with our ancestors that became before us and the future generations to come. Yeah, that's definitely that's the community that I am born of. I'm Muskogee Creek. That is my community. I go back home to Muskogee land whenever I go home to Oklahoma. I am on for what all intents and purposes is the Muskogee Reservation. I'm also Cherokee, a kind of a story, the same story, being from Oklahoma, you end up being of many tribes, but you only get to be enrolled in one, which I think is really interesting. Maybe folks don't know that unless you are Indigenous to North America and part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But for those who don't know, Indigenous people in North America and the United States, we do have certificate degree of Indian blood cards, tribal cards, where we are enrolled into our tribes. You're only allowed to be enrolled in one tribe, so even if you have grandparents that come from different tribes, you have to kind of pick which one you're going to be enrolled with and stick with that. So it's a really interesting thing to kind of ask, who is your community and what is your identity, because there's the one that we get to claim, and I'm a card carrying member for, but there's also the communities of my aunties and my uncles and my other relatives, and then being here in this urban space and knowing the greater Indigenous community, the Indigenous diaspora that exists out here, I feel like my community is all oppressed peoples, right? All people who have faced the lasting effects of the efforts of colonization and displacement and genocide and cultural erasure. Our liberation is bound together. So that is my community. Yeah. What's up? Palestine's my community. Also.
Do you mind if I add something? Yeah, so you reminded me, period. Talking about CIP, citizenship. That's kind of like how things are structured in the United States surrounding like federally recognized tribes or people who are part of federally recognized tribes. So I am obviously enrolled in the Chickasaw Nation, but if you see my citizenship card, it says NBQ, which means no blood quantum. I have heritage ancestors that were Chickasaw, Choctaw, Sac and Fox. But obviously, when it comes to like the colonial system and, getting identified on the Dawes Rolls and then just, other documents, we weren't able to my ancestors weren't able to kind of get that. So I think being able to be enrolled in my tribe and have access to these programs and have people that are, willing to like share their culture, share our culture, share our language, means a lot to me because I think about like, the freedmen. I think about people who aren't able to kind of get, be a part of a federally recognized tribe or state recognized tribe or any tribe because they feel like they can't be, they don't know how to connection blood quantum wise. And I just think that's like, it's just, I was gonna say a bad word, but it's not a good thing, and it doesn't matter. And I wanna inspire you to, if you feel like you can't, you don't have that like a specific person, or maybe you don't have the blood quantum, or you just feel a bit, displaced from your community, that it's always important to get involved. There's always gonna be people out there, whether it be social media, going to like a language meeting. That's how I met a lot of people. That's actually how I started to learn how to bead. So thank you to the aunties out there. There's always community, and there's always people that are going to be there for you. And I think it's really evident in indigenous communities, especially where I'm from.
And if I could just add, I think that, it's really important for us to remember that these institutions are not that old, right? Our tribes, our ways of life predate these institutions. So we don't need these institutions to validate our own identity. As someone who is Menominee, who is Oneida, I don't have enough blood quantum because I'm Black and I'm Irish, but 3 of my grandfathers were the chiefs of the Menominee tribe. And I struggled with that belonging for so long. But then again, I had to recognize, right, my own communities who do validate me, who do support me, who do care for me. And that is what community is. That is what kinship is at its core. And I think what we are experiencing politically right now, we need to remember what the true medicine is, right? And that is being able to sit on a panel like this, in a room like this, and share our hopes and dreams for the future and stand in solidarity with one another, with all of our communities that we bring, right? Because as we sit on the stage, it's not you or just me, right? It is all of our ancestors. It's all the communities that we hold that we bring on the stage with us. So thank you for allowing us to bring all of those ancestors, all those communities here in this dialogue today.
I think in the interest of time, I want to condense a few questions into one. So we've acknowledged that we've had a lot of settler colonialism, extraction, imposition of nation states, and then on top of that, we also know that indigenous sovereignty never seems to be fully recognized wherever we are in the world. So what are some ways that indigenous communities have resisted, or in some cases enhanced extraction, and what would you like to tell people beyond this panel, especially natural scientists and the global indigenous community who might be very strong allies?
So, like I mentioned earlier, I do research with this organization called Honor the Earth, trying to highlight the work that tribes are doing, especially their environmental programs. So in Oklahoma, there are 39 federally recognized tribes. Roughly around 34, 35 do have some kind of program or office or department where they work on environmentalism, work on advocating for our protection of our natural resources, and I had the chance to be able to work for my tribe's Office of Natural Resources at the Chickasaw Nation in Ada, Oklahoma. And a lot of the work that they were doing was trying to protect our water rights, protect from pollution, from overconsumption, from other non-native entities. So I just want to highlight like the work the tribes are doing is important and should be recognized. And you know, we kind of are, when I keep talking about politics and, you know, our political system, because it's extremely important, when it comes to tribes in Oklahoma, it's kind of difficult for them to be able to kind of get access to federal programs. So this thing called TAS, Treatment of State, that the EPA can give to certain tribes. Oklahoma tribes, besides one tribe, I'm pretty sure the Pawnee Nation, they have to go through like an extra you know, approval process by our governor in order to get you know, this thing called treatment of state. This is a small example. Well, I say small, but you know, a big example of the barriers that are put on Native people. We know what we want to protect. If you know, we see fish dying in like a pond, we don't need, you know, science is obviously really important, but when you think of like traditional ecological knowledge and just common sense, I mean, the right thing or most common sense thing to do is to protect that source of water through various means, and that's what tribes are doing. Luckily for tribes like the Pawnee Nation, they're able to kind of have environmental programs where they are able to kind of like set more strict standards for water quality, similar to tribes or the Isleta Pueblos in New Mexico, being able to set higher water quality standards, not just based on you know, trying to protect water for economic purposes, but also for cultural purposes, traditions, and just for the continued existence of their people, of their reservation, and of their land. So yeah, I'm really proud of the work that tribes are doing, and I hope I should be trying to hopefully publish my paper soon, so yeah.
I feel like I wanted to mention, because I think it's so interesting, and Edward, I would love to chat with you about what you know about this, but there's the Stop Cop City movement that's happening actively in Georgia right now in the Weelaunee Forest, which is ancestral Muskogee land. So if you don't know, Cop City is a police training facility that's being built in these sacred lands and this ancient forest in Georgia right now. And the training that is going on there, that will take place at Cop City is training that is influencing and supporting the type of colonial tactics and genocidal tactics that we are seeing in Palestine at the hands of Israel, that we are seeing here in the United States. So, like, the movement to try and stop that, not just extraction of that land, the destruction of that land, but also in providing this totally unnecessary, violent colonial machine is one really important fight that's going on currently, right? And there are so many implications that would come with the destruction of that forest and those lands. And then just thinking like different movements that I've supported throughout the years. There's the Wet'suwet'en people up in British Columbia who have been fighting for the sovereignty and keeping of their land for several years. And even here locally, I've been part of organizing for a group called FRAC out of Brooklyn. There's a pipeline that's actually still being actively constructed in Brooklyn that goes through Black and brown neighborhoods and like underneath schools and libraries. So these fights and these movements are connected, fully connected. And when we see these things happening, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in British Columbia, whether it's in Oklahoma, where I mean, my family, on the lands that they live on, they don't have clean drinking water. And this is the United States 2025, you know? So these movements are all connected, and I think that it's, there's the intention of the state is to quell and to silence and to snuff out these movements, as it has been for the entire project of the United States history, which you're right, Sutton, it's not a long-lasting project, right? There's a lot of like active movements that are going on that I just wanted to recognize, and I think that with the hope that bringing it to an audience like you all, we will again see how our liberation is all bound together, and hopefully get some more folks in on these fights.
Yeah, I think those are really great examples, because I was thinking just now, there were in Letcher County, Kentucky, they were trying to build a new correctional facility, a new prison, and they 2 indigenous activists just bought that land plot out from underneath them. And so now they have to find, maybe they won't, and that's kind of the hope too, a new place to build this huge correctional facility. And so it's really interesting to think, like, how do you stop this kind of extraction? And you just gotta like warrior up, I guess. You just gotta like do the thing that you know needs to be done, because if you don't do it, then nobody else is going to do it.
Be ungovernable.
Yeah, yeah, be ungovernable. Yeah, but yeah, you just got to do, and you don't want to think like the extractor. You don't want to think like that, but you also have to be one move ahead of them, and making sure that you're one move ahead of them, because if you're not, they're going to make sure that the thing that you love, like your language, your culture, your people, could be extinguished very quickly. And so, yeah, I'm always interested in stories like that, where, you just do the thing, and they just bought that land, and there's not going to be a prison in that spot anymore. So, yeah, you just gotta do that.
Yeah, it's so crazy though how like the idea of like the land being something that can be like bought and sold and commodified and like extracted is like such a colonial concept, and it's the reality, I guess, of living in this post-apocalyptic world. For Indigenous people, we've been living in a post-apocalyptic world already. Like the worst, we are in hell.
Thank you for
and but like, so then just like recognizing that like we like are not like having to, well, this is the system that we have to work in, and I think that we will see like Indigenous liberation, we will see Indigenous rights being fully honored and appreciated when we don't have to move in those systems and in those ways, and once we finally recognize that the land is not something to be owned. We are a part of the land, and the land is a part of us, and we have to take care of it, and it's not something that should be, bought, sold, traded.
Yeah, and that's what's really great. What they're doing about that piece of land is that it was used for mining, I believe, and so it was like mountaintop mining, and now they're trying to rematriate it. They're bringing native plants and native animals back into that area, and they're going to build it and be essentially guardians over this plot of land, and provide, again, going back to community, a place where people can go and really interact with the nature and try to bring it back to where it was and heal that land, even though they didn't do the work that really scarred that land. Indigenous women are coming in and healing land that needs them, and so it's a really beautiful thing to see, and to watch it happen from the ground floor is like, it gives me like butterflies. I'm like, I want to do something that cool too.
Mm-hmm. If I can say, as I was just listening to you all speak, I was thinking about, this concept of land ownership versus stewardship, right? And it's insane to me, right? Think about my grandfather 7 generations ago, Chief Oshkosh the Brave, right? And His issue was trying to understand the difference between land ownership and stewardship. We had always stewarded the land, and so when the so-called government of Wisconsin was really pushing us north and trying to relocate us, he had to learn how to seed over 10 million acres, so that today, the Menominee, we are positioned on 235,000 acres that we've never left. So we are the very few that were not forcibly removed. But here we are now 7 generations in the future, and we're not talking about just land extractions, we're talking about the patenting of plants, right? And so this is another level of extraction that we need to be aware of. And so how many people are familiar with traditional plant medicine? Raise your hand. Okay. What about psychedelics? Okay, and so psychedelics have now been rebranded, right, from the traditional ecological knowledge of plant medicines. And so what we're seeing are these plant medicines that have had incredible therapeutic benefits for our people in ceremonial ways that we quite frankly had to die for, right? The American Indian Religious Freedom Act, right? That was written in the 80s, right? We weren't able to sit in ceremony, right? It wasn't until 1994, until the amendment with the peyote, that then we could sit with peyote, right? But here we are now in 2025, and the psychedelic industry is $6 billion, right? Where are reparations? Where is reciprocity? How do we operationalize that, right? And so I think, to your point of, okay, how do we use their tools against them in a way, right, until we can get out of the systems? Well, let's look at some international frameworks, right? The Convention on Biological Diversity, right? Let's look at the third objective, access and benefit sharing. Some call it that, we call it reparations. Very scary word, so we'll call it access and benefit sharing. But how do we implement that, right? And that was the Nagoya Protocol, where we were able to continue to operationalize that in a way that we can implement it, right? So now if a company is profiting from genetic resources that come from a traditional indigenous community, they must enter into free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC. The next step after that is mutually agreed upon terms, also known as MAT. We've seen this widely used in the cosmetic industry. We've seen this in food and ag with basmati rice, right? We're seeing this now with ibogaine, with iboga out of West Africa, with the Bantu and the Wheatie in their export licenses, right? So I say this to say that there are many different ways that extraction is happening, and if we're not aware of it, then we are not going to have a way to stop it, right? And so it's really important that we leverage these international legal frameworks to make sure that indigenous communities are aware of what happens, because again, with capitalism, we know that that is on a very different timeline than our ways of really being able to consult, co-create, and give consent.
And if I could add to that, so the idea of like leveraging these systems, that's why I'm really interested in law and policy. You know, the work that tribes and Native people are doing to leverage leverage the law to, you know, embed themselves in the system to decolonize it. And that's why I really want to highlight the work that like tribes are doing with their environmental programs. And if you think about it, the most important thing to do is to kind of change the perception of people in relation to indigenous people. You know, historically in the United States, a lot of, you know, this is a lot of what I've studied. You know, our laws and policies kind of treat Native people, indigenous people, as like literal wards, like literal groups that, you know, have to be taken care of, that, you know, savage, they don't know what's best for them. We know what's best for them. So we're gonna create these federal agencies and these programs to be able to kind of control the actions of indigenous people, which involves like taking land, you know, assimilation and stripping people of their rights. So, you know, Native people are trying to leverage the law, you know, run for, you know, Congress or litigate cases. Specifically, when I think about like litigation and the work that tribes are doing in relation to the environment, my tribe, the Chickasaw Nation, and then also the Choctaw Nation, are working on, have worked on like adjudicating their water rights, and this is kind of funneled to other tribes in other places in order to kind of establish our rights, to have our treaties upheld, since we live in, a system where treaties, where tribes in the United States don't make inter treaties anymore. So these other systems, these other ways, litigating our rights, creating these memorandums with state governments or local governments to be able to say, like, we exist, this is the work we're doing, this is where our jurisdiction is, respect our sovereignty. So I think changing the political landscape is the first step. So
I want to bring our panel to a close by emphasizing that moving towards a stronger, more resilient future requires that we reconcile with our past. It requires us to be courageous, but I'm confident that we can do it together with our Indigenous brothers and sisters all over the world. Thank you until we meet again.
Yeah, okay.
If there are any questions, our panelists will be mingling with you all in the reception to follow right now. Thank you.